Long ago, in the days when kings ruled over the people of Israel, the land was once again caught in the grip of war. On one side of the valley of Elah stood the army of Israel, tired and trembling. On the opposite side, on a ridge of jagged rock, camped the army of the Philistines, cruel, proud, and ready to destroy. Every morning, as the mist rose from the valley floor, the Israelites lined up in battle formation. Their hearts pounded. They gripped their swords tighter, but they dared not move forward. They didn't charge. They didn't speak. They didn't even breathe too loudly. Because every day, he came. The earth quaked beneath his feet. The clang of his armor sent chills down the backs of every soldier. His name was Goliath. He was a giant, a warrior since his youth, and taller than any man had ever seen. His armor alone weighed more than what a dozen soldiers could carry. His spear looked more like a tree than a weapon. His presence alone silenced thousands. And then came his voice, mocking loud, unafraid. Why do you line up for battle if no one dares to fight? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Send someone. Send anyone. Let him come down to me. If he can fight and kill me, we will serve you. But if I prevail, then you will be our slaves. Forever. Each word hung heavy in the air. Men in Israel's camp shifted nervously. They looked to Saul. They looked at each other. No one stepped forward. 1 day passed. Then another. 10 days. 20. On the 40th day, Goliath came again. His challenge had become a routine now. The soldiers no longer looked toward the front when he shouted. Their heads hung lower. Their hands no longer rested on their swords with hope, but with defeat. Fear had done its work. The mighty army of Israel, the army of the living God, stood still. Inside his tent, King Saul sat in silence. He was once a brave man, a warrior. But fear had crept into his mind like a dark fog. Even he, Israel's king and tallest man, would not go. His eyes were fixed on the floor. His thoughts were heavy. Who can defeat such a man? He whispered to no one. The soldiers talked among themselves in low voices. Did you see the size of his sword? His shield bearer is bigger than any man in our camp. He is more beast than human. Even if someone did step forward, they would die. Every man in that camp had trained for battle. They had lifted swords, practiced maneuvers, and marched through mountains. But none of them could lift the weight of their fear. They were trained for war, but not for this. One man said, Saul has promised great rewards to anyone who kills the giant. His daughter's hand in marriage. Great riches. A place of honor in the kingdom. Another replied bitterly, What use is reward if you're dead? They all agreed. Goliath was undefeatable. So Israel waited in silence, day after day, their hearts slowly sinking, their courage buried under the shadow of a giant. But far away from this battlefield, where the air was not thick with fear, and the ground did not tremble from heavy footsteps, something else was happening. Not in the tent of a king, not in the arms of a soldier, but in the quiet heart of a shepherd. And though the men at war did not know it yet, help was on the way. Far from the battlefield, the valley was still. A gentle breeze moved through the tall grasses. Birds chirped. The sky was bright, clear, and untouched by war. In this peaceful place, a boy sat beneath a tree. He held a harp in his lap. His fingers danced across the strings, drawing out soft, worshipful melodies. His name was David. He was the youngest of 8 sons. His brothers were strong, tall, and admired in the village. But David was small. Ordinary, some would say. Just a boy with a slingshot, a harp, and a deep love for the Lord. While others fought with swords, David fought his battles in the hills, watching over his father's sheep. But these hills had dangers of their own. Suddenly, a roar split the air. The sheep scattered, bleating in fear. David's eyes snapped open. He rose quickly, slinging his harp over his shoulder. From behind a large rock, a lion sprang forward, sinking its teeth into a trembling lamb. Without a second thought, David ran toward the beast, shouting, "You will not take one of my sheep." He reached into his pouch, pulled out a stone, and placed it swiftly in his sling. His hand moved with practiced ease. The stone flew through the air. A sharp crack, then silence. The lion collapsed. David knelt beside the lamb, checking its wounds, then looked up at the sky and said, "Thank you, Lord. You protect me always." He wasn't shaken. Not because he was strong, but because he knew who stood with him. He had faced lions before, even a bear once. And he had learned, when God is with you, nothing is impossible. At home, his father Jesse called from the doorway. "David." David turned. wiping his hands on his tunic. "Yes, father. Your brothers are with the army. Take this roasted grain, this bread, and these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how they're doing. Bring back word." David's eyes lit up. "I'll go at once." He rose early the next morning. With supplies packed and sheep safely handed off to a caretaker, David set off toward the camp. The journey was long, but his heart was light. He had always dreamed of seeing the battlefield, where heroes stood, where battles were won. But when he arrived, the sight before him wasn't what he expected. The army of Israel wasn't shouting in triumph. They were whispering, hiding, watching the valley nervously. From the far side, the enemy's champion stepped out. Goliath. His voice rolled like thunder once again. "Who among you dares to fight me? Come forward if you dare." David stopped in his tracks. His young eyes locked on the giant. He watched the soldiers shrink back in fear. One man nearby muttered, 40 days he's come, and not one of us will go." David turned. "What will be done for the man who defeats him?" Another answered, "The king promises great riches, his daughter's hand in marriage, and freedom from taxes for his whole family." David didn't seem interested in the reward. He asked again, "But who is this Philistine, that he should mock the armies of the living God?" His voice carried. "Too far." His oldest brother, Eliab, stormed over. "What are you doing here?" David blinked. "Father sent me to bring food. I just arrived." Eliab's face hardened. "Why did you come? You left those sheep in the wilderness, didn't you? I know your pride, your wicked heart. You just wanted to watch the battle." David looked stunned. Then calmly he replied, "What have I done now? Can't I even ask a question?" He turned away, but the fire in his chest burned stronger. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Not just because of the giant, but because the people of God had forgotten who they were. David stood silently at the edge of the camp. He looked back toward the valley, then down at the sling tied at his belt. His fingers moved slowly, reaching into his pouch. He pulled out a few smooth stones and studied them in his palm. 5 stones. He placed them back gently. But in his mind, each one had a name: faith, obedience, courage, trust, praise. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. This battle wasn't just about a giant. It was about remembering that no one who mocks the living God will stand. The sun had climbed higher now. Heat shimmered across the valley. Inside the Israelite camp, word began to spread, whispers traveling from tent to tent. Then someone said, "A boy is asking to fight the giant." "What boy? He's not a soldier. He came with bread and cheese. Surely this is a joke." But it was no joke. And soon, the boy stood in the presence of Israel's king. The tent of Saul was large, draped in royal cloth, but its shadows were deep. Saul, once a mighty leader, now seemed weighed down with anxiety. His face was pale. His eyes, hollow with doubt, looked David over from head to toe. "You," Saul said at last. "You want to fight the Philistine?" David stood tall, though he barely reached Saul's shoulder. His voice was calm. "Let no one lose heart because of him. I will go and fight him." Saul blinked, astonished. "You're just a boy. He has been a warrior from his youth. You have no armor, no sword, no experience." David took a slow step forward. "When a lion came to take a lamb from my flock, I went after it. I struck it and rescued the lamb. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair and killed it. And I did the same to a bear." He paused. His hands clenched, not in fear, but in memory. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." There was silence. Saul stared at David. This boy's courage wasn't loud or proud. It was rooted in something deeper. He finally nodded. "Go," Saul said softly, "and may the Lord be with you." David bowed his head. Saul stood and motioned for his servants. "Bring him armor." They brought Saul's own tunic, his bronze helmet, and his sword. David slipped them on. The helmet slid over his eyes. The tunic sagged to his knees. The sword was far too heavy for his waist. He took a step and stumbled. David chuckled to himself, then began removing the armor piece by piece. "I can't go in these," he said. "I haven't tested them." He laid down the armor gently and adjusted his simple belt. On it hung a worn leather pouch. At his side, his sling. "This," he said with a quiet smile, "is all I need. My sling, and God's promise." Outside the tent, the camp watched him walk away. This boy with no armor, no sword, and no fear. Back to how he got the stone. After he left the camp, He walked alone toward a nearby stream. The murmurs of soldiers faded behind him. The enemy's laughter echoed from the ridge ahead. He knelt at the water's edge. The current ran cool and clear. His fingers searched among the stones. One by one, he chose 5. Smooth, round, fit perfectly in the palm. He placed them in his pouch with care. Then he stood. His eyes were steady. His lips moved in a whisper. Not by might, not by power, but by your spirit, Lord. He took a deep breath and looked across the valley. There stood Goliath, mocking, laughing, waiting. But David wasn't afraid. The boy who had faced lions and bears now walked forward with something stronger than armor, sharper than any sword. He walked forward with the living God. David stood alone at the edge of the valley. Behind him, the Israelite army watched in silence, thousands holding their breath. Before him, across the open space of dust and heat, stood the giant, Goliath. The ground between them was cracked and dry. No trees, no shadows, only 2 figures, one massive and armored like a mountain, the other, a boy in simple shepherd's clothes, a sling hanging loosely from his hand. The sun beat down. Heat shimmered in waves. No birds sang. Goliath moved first. He stepped out from the Philistine line with a thunderous laugh. His shield-bearer scurried before him like a shadow. As Goliath drew closer and caught sight of David, his laughter grew louder, crueler. "You," he spat. "You send me this child?" He looked around, arms wide. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" He sneered and snarled. "I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David didn't flinch. He stepped forward with calm in his eyes, a fire in his chest. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin," he said. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." His voice rang across the valley, clear and fearless. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down so that all the world will know there is a God in Israel." He lifted his chin. "This battle is not ours. It belongs to the Lord, and he will give you into our hands." A silence fell over the valley. The Philistines waited, stunned. The Israelites watched, frozen. Then Goliath roared and charged. His armor clanged. Dust rose in clouds beneath his feet. But David didn't wait. He ran too. Not away from. He ran straight toward the giant. His hand reached into his pouch. One stone. Smooth. Perfect. He placed it in the sling. His wrist twisted with practiced grace. The sling spun faster, faster. Wind whistled past his ears. The giant raised his sword, bellowing rage. Then David released. The stone flew. It whistled through the air. It moved faster than an arrow, straighter than any blade. It struck Goliath between the eyes. The roar stopped. The sword slipped from his hand. For a heartbeat, all was still. Then Goliath staggered. He wobbled once, and the giant fell. He crashed to the earth with the sound of thunder. The ground trembled. Dust burst upward like smoke from the earth. The Philistines gasped. Their champion fallen. Their voices broke into chaos. Some screamed. Others turned. Fear rippled through their ranks like wildfire. And they fled. Behind David, the Israelites erupted. Their voices, once silenced by fear, now surged in joy and power. They rushed past him, swords drawn, shouting, chasing the fleeing enemy. But David did not move. He stood over the fallen giant. He looked down, then slowly raised his eyes to heaven. "This victory is yours, O God," he said quietly. No celebration, no boasting, just gratitude. In that moment, the valley was no longer a battlefield. It was holy ground. The boy who had walked with sheep now stood over a giant, not because he was strong, but because he trusted the one who is. The victory didn't belong to David. It belonged to God, and Israel would never forget. The battlefield quieted. The dust began to settle. The roar of war faded into the distant hills, replaced now by something new, reverence. David turned away from the fallen giant and walked back toward the Israelite camp. His face was calm, not triumphant, not boastful, but peaceful, focused. Soldiers stepped aside as he passed. No longer did they see just a shepherd boy. They saw something greater. In the crowd, his brothers stood frozen. Eliab, the one who had once doubted him, looked down, ashamed. Then slowly he stepped forward. His arms opened. He pulled David into an embrace. "I was wrong," Eliab whispered. "So wrong." David said nothing. He didn't need to. The moment had spoken for him. He wasn't seeking praise. He wasn't looking for honor. He knew this victory had never been his to claim. Saul, standing at the edge of the scene, watched everything. His eyes didn't leave David. He studied the boy's hands, the sling at his side, the face still lifted toward heaven. "Whose son is this?" he asked quietly. And though the answer would come, David, son of Jesse of Bethlehem. In Saul's heart, he knew that this boy would not remain a shepherd for long. David was brought before the king. "Today," Saul said, "you delivered Israel." David lowered his head. "The Lord delivered us." Saul smiled. "And you reminded us to trust him." The days passed. Songs began to spread across the land, sung in streets, whispered in markets, played in the courts. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. But David kept his harp close. He returned to the fields. He still played beneath the stars, still cared for the sheep. He had faced the giant, yes, but his heart remained the same, humble, faithful, grateful. And though the people shouted his name, David still whispered another, Yahweh. For he knew, without the Lord, he was nothing. Years would pass. More battles would come. Struggles, failures, victories. And one day, David would wear a crown, not just in battle, but as king of Israel. But none of that began in a palace. It all started with a stone in a sling, with a heart that believed God was bigger than fear. Before he was a king, David was a boy. Before he was a warrior, he was a worshiper. Before he ever picked up a sword, he picked up a harp. And even when he faced a giant, he never saw himself as the hero. Because David understood something many forget. It's not about the size of the warrior. It's about the size of the faith inside him. Don't forget to subscribe and follow for more. Thanks for watching.